It's a nice rainy day outside. I think it's the perfect time to talk about some autumn reads. This is my guide to books to read in autumn. I try to sort the books into categories, but they're kind of wishy-washy. The first category is dark academia, and I'm sure you heard of the first book before. The Secret History by Donna Tartt is about our main character going to an expensive college and joining an exclusive group that studies classics. He gets sucked into this world of elitism. This is kind of the foundation of dark academia. And the other book that's sort of the foundation of dark academia is If We Were Villains, which is quite similar to The Secret History, except If We Were Villains follows theater kids. There's this group of students that go to this very selective theater school. They have to reapply every year, and each year there become less and less and less students. Both of these books are about a group of men who have a very codependent relationship with each other. Mostly men. There are also women in If We Were Villains. And these groups are very selective and very isolated from the rest of the world or the rest of the college. And in both of them, there is a murder. The next book is Babel by R.F. Kuang. I actually read this book in August. This is one of the more new dark academia books, but has quickly become one of the classics. This follows a boy named Robin who is taken from his hometown in China to Britain by this British professor with the hopes of one day going to Oxford and studying at the Tower of Babel. It also explores themes of elitism, but takes it further by exploring capitalism, colonialism, sexism, racism. This book does have a fantasy element, whereas the other two don't, but it's a very minimal part of the story, and it just further serves to talk about the themes. I think this is the best dark academia book. Next is Ninth House by Leigh Bardugo, that follows our main character, Alex Stern, as she joins a secret society at Yale. There are multiple different societies that are all focused on various parts of demon and ghost summoning. And Alex is special because she can see greys, or ghosts. But she has things from her past that she doesn't want people to know about. She's trying to figure out what happened to her mentor. Meanwhile, there's a murder in town, and she needs to figure out how it's connected to the secret societies. And she has to team up with unlikely people to do so. The next book is These Violent Delights by Micah Never Ever. This story follows two boys named Paul and Julian who meet at a university in like the early 70s. Our main character, Paul, is very sensitive and is struggling with his father's recent death. The book follows Paul and Julian's unhealthy, codependent relationship. This book is the epitome of Be Gay, Do Crime. The next book is Funny by Mona Awad. Whereas most of these books explore toxic male relationships, this book explores toxic female relationships. This book follows our main character Samantha as she attends university. There are these group of students in her class who call each other Bunny, and they're kind of cultish, quite frankly. Everything changes when Samantha gets an invitation to join them. This book just gets trippier from there. The next book is Vicious by V.E. Schwab. Whereas in most of these books, the academic part is related to language, books, and classics, this book explores science. It follows two boys named Victor and Eli, who start out as companions and college roommates. Both of them are very smart and arrogant and ambitious. They realize that by having a near-death experience, they could gain superpowers. The story really starts 10 years after they both get superpowers, where Victor breaks out of prison in order to catch his old friend, because they've become enemies. They had a falling out due to their opposing views that sort of stem from the different powers that they got. And the last book is Piranesi by Susanna Clark. While this book doesn't have everything that would make it actually dark academia, it still is about academia, and this is one of my favorite books, so I wanted to recommend it. It follows our main character, Piranesi, who lives in this giant building, which he calls the house, and he thinks the house is alive. But he also thinks that he and this man that he calls the other are the only two people in the entire world. So the book is just him trying to figure out who he is, who the other is, where he is. This book also explores his relationship with the other, who says that their goal is to find the great and secret knowledge. It is their moral duty, he says. But mostly this book is just beautiful descriptions of the house, which is based off the art by the artist Piranesi. Like, his name is actually Piranesi, not the character in the book. Actually, that wasn't the last book because I just read another one. The next book is The Cloisters, which takes place at the Met in our magic system. If it is a magic system, it's kind of unclear. It follows tarot cards, and it brings up questions of fate. It's quite a nice academia book, and I feel like it's sort of different from the others in, like, subject matter. The next category is Gothic. So I've organized this. The beginning of the list is the classics that are Gothic, and then the second half is the modern Gothics. So of course we start with Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. It follows the myth, the legend himself, Victor Frankenstein, who creates his monster, and it's just a really interesting exploration of his character and the monster's character. It brings up a lot of moral questions. It's one of my favorite classics. Next, we have The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde, my other favorite classic. It's about this beautiful young man named Dorian Gray who basically sells his soul. His portrait ages and reflects all the horrible things that he does, but his body and his beauty never changes. It's just overall a beautiful book. The next book is Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, which is sort of a mystery novel. The main character is just investigating the strange happenings between Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Next is We Have Always Lived in the Castle by Shirley Jackson. It's about the dark dealings of this family that live on the outskirts of the town. Nobody in the town really likes or trusts them. We kind of have an unreliable narrator with our main character. She really doesn't like her family. So dark and gripping. On to the modern books. Juniper and Thorn by Ava Reid. It's a Gothic retelling of the fairy tale The Juniper Tree in the Grimm's Brothers. It takes place sort of around the time of the Industrial Revolution. It's about our main character, Marlinchen, as she is locked in a tower with her two sisters and her father, who is cursed to never be satisfied. Her father expects Marlinchen and her sisters to be pure, but it all changes when she sneaks out one day to see the ballet and she falls in love with this beautiful dancer. And this book isn't really about the romance. The romance kind of drives the plot. I just need you to know that it is not a romance book. And a lot of people are shocked at how gory this gets because that's not what they were expecting from it. Because the cover kind of doesn't look like, it doesn't seem like this would be this kind of book, but it is. The next book is The Last Tale of the Flower Bride by Roshni Chokshi. There are 2 different times and 3 important characters. The first timeline follows these 2 girls, Indigo and Azure, as they form this very unhealthy codependent relationship. And they are convinced that they are fairy tale princesses and that one day a fey king will come and whisk them away to his fairy tale land. And the second timeline is later, and an older Indigo marries this man who is convinced that his brother was taken by the fae when he was younger. We get his POV. And he marries Indigo with the one caveat that he is not allowed to ask her anything about herself or her past, which is a great foundation for a relationship. And this book is just beautifully worded. There's so many references to various mythologies and fairy tales, but if you don't like flowery language, then don't read it, but it's very vivid. Also one of my favorite books of all time. And lastly, we have A Dowry of Blood by S.T. Gibson. It is a sort of retelling of Dracula told by the point of view of one of his brides. And it's beautiful, it's queer. I'm not going to say anything else. Just read it. Next category is fairy tales, but also just fantasy. It's going to start out with fairy tales. And then I just had a couple fantasy books which weren't exactly fairy tales, and I was just like, I'll put them in this one. And I really wasn't sure whether I should put The Last Tale of the Flower Bride and Juniper and Thorn in fairy tales or in Gothic. I decided to put them in Gothic. So the first book is An Enchantment of Ravens by Margaret Rogerson, which is about this girl named Isabel who creates beautiful portraits for the fae. And in this world, fae can't create things on their own. They can't do what it's called craft in the book. And so this book explores a lot of themes of like what humanity is. And Rogerson also does a great job of writing immortal characters. Like sometimes you're fooled and you're like, this is just like a guy, and then you're reading it like, oh my god, they're creepy. They feel phony. They feel rotted on the inside, and it's so delicious. In this book, there are a lot of descriptions of the beautiful autumn woods, and there are mushroom monsters, and it's kind of an adventure novel at the beginning, and then we go to the fair folk court. It's a beautiful book. It's very vivid. I read A Sorcery of Thorns, which is also by Margaret Rogerson. I quite love Margaret Rogerson. In this world, our main character, Elizabeth, is a librarian. She grew up in one of the great libraries, and within these libraries, they have monster books. The books are alive, and sometimes they turn into monsters when they're provoked. And these monster books are called grimoires. And one day, one of the monster books escapes, and she is blamed for it. So she's whisked away by a sorcerer, and sorcerers gain their powers by making a deal with a demon. This world has a beautiful magic system. And more so than the plot, I love the characters. They're so dynamic. Uprooted by Naomi Novik is a book about this magical woods that's slowly taking over. It is loosely a Beauty and the Beast retelling. Every 10 years or so, this wizard named the Dragon comes and steals a girl away from our main character's village. And they go to this tower and he teaches her magic. This book is so beautiful. There's so many descriptions of the woods and how it consumes people. And all of the creatures in the woods are infected, and all the infected creatures are so unique. This book is based off Slavic folklore, so is her Naomi Novik's other book, Spinning Silver, which I also love, but that's winter. One Dark Window by Rachel Gillig tells the story of Elspeth Spindle, who has a demon in her head. In this world, there is this blight, or plague, and once you catch it, you either die or you gain powers that might eventually kill you. In this world, there's also things called Providence cards, and each Providence card has a different power. Our story starts when Elspeth is attacked by highwaymen, and she later comes to meet one of them again. Once again, this is a very vivid book. There's a lot of beautiful descriptions of magical woods. A Study in Drowning by Ava Reed tells the story of Effie, who is an architecture student at the architecture college. And she's always believed in fairy tales. This image of the fairy king has haunted her since she was a child. And one day there is an announcement that people from the architecture college are being welcomed to redesign this manor of the author of her favorite fairy tale book. And of course, she jumps at the opportunity, as well as another person from the literature college, and they sort of don't get along at first. And once again, the genres of fairy tale and Gothic, they're really overlapping right now. Next is The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern, which was my favorite book for actual years. In this book, there's a very soft magic system. There's our main character, whose name is Celia, is a magician. And she, along with her rival, joins this thing called the Night Circus, where they secretly use magic to enhance the rides, and they're having this competition, though they don't know how the competition works. They don't know what they're competing to do. But both of their mentors are having a long-term argument that they keep holding these competitions. They have different ideas of how teaching works. But mostly, this book is just beautiful descriptions of the rides. It's very vivid and just aesthetic. This is one of the no plot, just vibes books. Although there is a plot, but it's not super important. And there is a romance, but it's not very prominent. Lastly, The Spirit Bears Its Teeth by Andrew Joseph White tells the story of our main character who is autistic and trans. So basically, there's a veil between the living and the dead, and our main character can summon the dead. But he's not supposed to because he's perceived as a woman, and so he's sent to basically conversion therapy. This is a really triggering book. I warn you, if you're trans or if you're autistic, this is a really triggering book. And a really cool plot and magic system. The next category, of course, is horror. I'm going to start with a not super scary book because it is a middle grade book, and that is Coraline by Neil Gaiman. In this book, Coraline goes through a little door in her house to find her other mother and father who want to sew buttons in her eyes. And despite this being middle grade, it is quite scary and I think can be enjoyed by everyone, which is the case for a lot of Neil Gaiman's books. Next is one of my favorite books of all time. I think this is one of the most definitely Halloween books that I've read in a while, and that is Slewfoot by Brom. I would sort of consider this a retelling of The Crucible, except our main character actually does make a deal with the devil, or not the devil, a demon, and it isn't the characters of The Crucible. So this story follows Abatha, our main character. She's from Britain, and she just arrives in a Puritan village. And I think that's all I'm gonna say, because there is a thing in the synopsis that came as a shock to me when I was first reading it, so I think that's all you need to know. The second half of this book is really, really gory. Just warning you. Now for a completely different kind of story, The Merry Dredger. This book follows our main character looking for her lost sister, and she finds out that she joined a cult. So our main character does the only thing you would do, which is also join that cult. When I was reading this, I was not particularly scared. It's more just creepy. And also, this book is queer. We love queer books. What Moves the Dead by T. Kingfisher, a book about creepy mushrooms. This, I think, is the only one on this category that is a series, although I haven't read the second book. And honestly, if you don't want to read the second book, I don't think you have to, although it's been a while since I read it, so like maybe you do. I don't remember. This book follows our main character named Alex, who is a retired soldier, as she goes to visit her childhood friend, Madeline, in her countryside home. And when she arrives, she finds something is off with Madeline and the surrounding wildlife. The rabbits are acting weird, and she figures out that they are infected with mushrooms, kind of like The Last of Us. Once again, I didn't feel like really scared when I was reading this. It was sort of just like, oh, it's not that kind of horror where you're like turning on the lights and like looking around as if something's watching you. It's just like the I don't like this kind of horror. Next we have Our Wives Under the Sea by Julia Armfield. Since this is like about the ocean, I feel like it could be more of a summer read. So maybe read it in September, although this video is coming out in October, so I don't know. But it's about this lesbian couple. One of them does marine dives as her job. Her name is Lee, and her wife, Miri, has been waiting for Lee to come back from this one voyage for a very long time. They think that they're lost. However, eventually Lee does come back, but something is different about her. This book is really creepy. It's cosmic horror, Lovecraftian horror. But I also love how this book isn't just the horror, like it really dives into Miri and Lee's relationship and how they're trying to rectify it after Lee comes back. We have another queer book with Wilder Girls by Rory Power. This book tells the story of this group of girls in this all-girls boarding school where people have been getting this sickness and slowly dying off. And if they do get sick but they don't die, they have these like malformations afterward. The horror of this book is really feeling like there's something wrong with your body, like something has infected your body and it's not yours anymore. So the girls in this boarding school are supposed to all stay inside the borders of the boarding school. One day, one of our main character's friends goes missing, and so they leave the borders in search of her, and it's, oh my god, it's so thematically poignant too. This is a really good book. And of course, I have to talk about It, which is probably my favorite Stephen King book. I feel like a lot of Stephen King books have a lot of nonsense that doesn't need to be in there. Like, I read Fairy Tale by Stephen King, like, the first half didn't need to happen, but it was so cohesive. I was attached to all of the characters, and generally, if you want to read a long horror book, or if you want to read a Stephen King book, read It with the next book I'm going to talk about. And lastly, we have Carrie by Stephen King. This is the story of a misunderstood high school girl named Carrie White, who finds out that she has telekinetic powers, and things go crazy. You spend all the book like building up the tension. It's good. The next category is romance, and this is a short one. There's only 2. The first is The Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches by Sangyu Mandala. It's a very sunshine grumpy romance between a witch and a librarian. In this world, witches have to be alone. They're not allowed to be together because their magic gets too dangerous, but our main character is called to help these children witches who are being raised together, and that's how she meets her librarian, and it's a really cute book about family. The next is The Salt Grows Heavy, which is a short, cute little romance between a plague doctor and a scary man-eating siren. They're just living their lives, and they encounter a child cult. I don't know if this book is really a romance book. Maybe it's more of a horror book. I can't really tell, but it's really cute, so. The next category is short stories. The first short story is The October Game by Ray Bradbury. I don't want to give too much away because it's just really good. It's quite short. It's an easy, quick read. It starts with this man, his wife, and child preparing for a dinner party in October. And really, that's all I'm going to say. Next is Children of the Corn by Stephen King. This story is about Bert and Vicky who run over a child on their road trip, and they go to this town to investigate things, and it gets creepy. This story follows Bert and Vicky, an unhappy married couple who, on a road trip, accidentally run over a child. It gets darker from there, but I'm not going to say anything else. Lastly is The Yellow Wallpaper by Charlotte Perkins Gilman. This story is about a young housewife who is locked up in this room with this garish wallpaper because supposedly she is sick. It's just a beautiful, scary feminist tale. I really thought this video would be longer. I think that every year I'm gonna make another one of these videos, or every few years, because I feel like I'm always reading, and especially like I love autumn, so I'm always trying to get that feeling of autumn when I read. Thank you for watching. If you have any similar book recommendations, please leave them in the comments, because I'm always looking for new books to read.